Ruth, the schema that we're going to talk about today is very typical for therapists. And in fact, they did some research on typical schemas with therapists, and this was one of the main ones, and really kind of relates to the topic that we're talking about today, which is this idea of therapists being unable to finish sessions on time. And self-sacrifice is one of the schemas that has a lot to do with that. I'm Rita Union, clinical psychologist, advanced schema therapist, supervisor trainer.
And I'm Ruth Holt. We're using this series called 7-Minute Schemas Ask Us, where we answer common questions therapists have, and you may even want to put your own questions in the comments below. Yeah, I think you're right, Rita. There's a few schemas that can make it really tricky to finish those sessions that you find yourself, you're going over 10 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe even longer, and kind of wondering what is going on here. And that's really important to start to reflect on yourself and thinking about what is it that's happening in me, what's getting activated. So, as you say, self-sacrifice is going to definitely tell you that being a good therapist is about giving more care, more time, doing more. Or I may not have ever learned how to say stop. Saying no makes me feel like a bad person. So that schema might get in the way. And of course, we know there's often a bit of anger brewing in the background. There's a little angry child who's kind of frustrated that this self-sacrifice schema keeps extending the session.
And that's the thing, that it builds up resentment, and that also relates to that kind of approval seeking or recognition seeking. So feeling guilty and wanting approval and recognition at the same time, and then in time becoming resentful that I'm constantly running late, the next person has to wait. Before I know it, it's 7, 8 o'clock at night. I haven't left. All of that kind of domino effect as a result of not finishing on time.
Yeah, and sometimes, there can also be a sense of feeling quite trapped by a client's behavior, maybe a bit more subjugating to that client. Like, I don't want to get them angry, and if I push back, then they're going to, be angry with me or criticize me. Or it could be, that we've got a little impulsive child going on, a kind of part of you that gets excited about, oh, here's a new idea, and we can talk about this topic. Or even an undisciplined child mode is like, oh, time, whatever, well, I'll get there in the end. So we really need to think about what are the schemas, what are the modes that might be operating. Sometimes I think you were talking about overcompensation happening too with therapists.
Yeah, just kind of, that it's about feeling good about themselves, that they're giving enough to the client by, spending more time. So it's really about how I feel in terms of giving more and going over time. One of the things that might be important with this particular problem is seeing if it's with specific patients. If it's not with all patients, it's only a collect few, having a think about what it is about that collect few of patients that's creating this problem consistently. And this can start leading us into, the client's issues and then the client therapist dynamic as a result of that.
Yeah, so we'll certainly be exploring, the self-sacrifice schema and how that plays out for clinicians in our Learning Lab series that's coming up in a fortnight, thinking through that more deeply and how to really get back into your healthy adult and not stay stuck. Sometimes there's just a bit of a lack of skill. We haven't always been taught how to have a whole session, how to kind of have a beginning, middle, and an end to a session. And so sometimes we need to just have a think about how do I spend those last 10, 15 minutes? Traditionally in schema therapy, we encourage people to be starting the session, kind of checking in on the week and the homework, and then setting up the work for the session, which is the real main body of the session, but then allowing 15, 20, even 20 minutes for dysregulated clients to really de-escalate, get back into their healthy adult and in a way that kind of allows them to reflect on the work they've just done, and then setting up the plan for out of session homework. So we need to, in that last 10, 15 minutes, to be really working on that rather than kind of having this sort of never ending stream of ideas. And I actually think that gives a lot of containment for clients to know that there is a beginning, a middle, and an end to a session.
Absolutely. And I guess, if time management is something that we struggle with as therapists, and, perhaps we are in a bit of an undisciplined or impulsive child mode even, and so the general structure we don't kind of stick to, and then again, this kind of perpetuates this problem of not finishing on time.
Yeah. So there's some therapist things that could be maybe happening, but there's also, of course, clients that might be getting triggered. And, typically we might think about a client who maybe has an abandonment schema. So for them, the end of a session is actually a triggering event. Leaving someone who maybe you've shared something deep with, something vulnerable, can trigger a sense of all the other times where someone walked away from me or wasn't there for me. And that can prompt them to want to hold the therapist. And they may have learnt ways to hold people. It could have been by a lot of extra talking. It could be by kind of having a juicy something or other to share at the end. It could be ways to kind of extend the session because that abandonment is activated.
The door handle technique, as soon as you kind of open the door and there it is, there's the topic of the week that needs to be discussed. And look, I think there's lots of things that can contribute to that. It could also be that the patient is in a coping mode the entire session, and it's not until the very end that the coping mode starts to kind of dissipate a little bit. You get some vulnerability and they're ready to do the work, and you're like, but hang on, it's 5-2. I feel bad, my self-sacrifice is being activated, so really kind of calling out this pattern. If you notice it's something that consistently happens, that you bring that to the therapy, and that's grist for the mill and discussing how to change that pattern.
Yeah, in fact, I want to encourage you, if that's happening, to really at the beginning of the next session reflect on that and say, I've been wondering about how things happen between us, towards the end of the session, checking in, asking the client, or even being willing to share. I'm wondering, whether that emotional deprivation is coming up for you, that sense that you haven't really been seen or heard by people before. And so there's an urgency to the end of the session. It's like, I just need you to listen to one more thing and then I will feel heard. Can we talk about that? Because I don't want you to have that sense of being abandoned or being deprived right at the end of the session. And at the same time, it needs to work for both of us that, I have a need to kind of move to my lunch break or the next client, and you have a need to feel safe at the end of a session.
Yeah, and that you matter. That's really important. So maybe thinking about how can we deal with your coping mode right at the very start. Again, like you said before, talk about it in the first 10 minutes, and then that's part of the work. And then how can we make you feel like you matter at the very end without then starting therapy at 10:2, for example.
Yeah, well, Rita, that's our 7 minutes. We need to finish. We want to encourage people to leave their questions in the comment section below or email us directly, and we'd certainly love to address your questions. You can find out more about training or supervision or other opportunities at the Schema Therapy Institute of Australia and follow the links below.